DevilNeverCry.
Some new details in regards to Final Fantasy XVI and its demo have recently come to light, which may mean we get our hands on it sooner than we think. For those of you who are currently out of the loop when it comes to Final Fantasy XVI and its demo, let me briefly get you up to speed. In a previous interview with Japanese gaming media outlet Famitsu, Naoki Yoshida, the producer of Final Fantasy XVI, confirmed that it would be receiving a demo that would come roughly 2 weeks before the game was set to launch on June 22nd. We then learned through a recent PlayStation blog that the demo would include the opening sequence of Final Fantasy XVI, where you would play through the entirety of Clive's youth and the fall of Rosalith. The overall idea with the demo is to get players introduced and intrigued into the world of Final Fantasy XVI, which would then allow you to carry your save data from that demo into the final game. Despite all these interviews and articles, however, we don't actually have an official date for when the demo is set to drop. Some of us have rumored or speculated that it would launch to coincide with the LA event that would be held on June the 11th, which would roughly fit the timescale of 2 weeks before launch, whilst other somewhat dubious rumors state that it will be dropping on June the 12th, which would coincide with apparently when some sponsored streamers would be able to get access or hands-on with the game or the demo, we're not quite sure, to be able to stream it. So you can imagine the collective surprise today when everybody who digitally pre-ordered Final Fantasy XVI via the PlayStation Network found the demo sitting in their library. It's obviously not playable, of course. People aren't even able to download it, I believe. It just means that Square Enix have uploaded the demo over to the PlayStation Store. It's likely sitting there on the back end just waiting for its moment to shine when it's unlockable and people can finally dive in. With that said, this does pose a pretty big question. Will this demo be exclusive to only those who have digitally pre-ordered Final Fantasy XVI via the PlayStation Network? Is everyone who pre-ordered the game physically screwed out of playing the demo before launch? All questions worth considering. Final Fantasy XV quite infamously had a demo tied with the purchase of the Type 0 remaster, which pretty much everybody that I knew bought that game only for the demo and not for the actual remaster itself. Or is this simply just an error on PlayStation or Square Enix's end, where this demo was visible long before it was even supposed to be? If you head on over to the Final Fantasy XVI subreddit or check out places like Twitter, you'll find that not everybody who has digitally pre-ordered has this demo sitting in their library. It likely boils down to people being in different parts of the world, different time zones, and simply when PlayStation updates that store in their specific region. Though in all honesty, I'm sure most of us here would probably like it if Square Enix simply just shadow dropped the demo on a random weekend, allowing us to get stuck in way before the game is set to release. Moving on to another topic that I briefly wanted to touch upon today, Final Fantasy XVI or Square Enix and their trailers, and some of the criticism that they seem to get in regards to them showing off too much of a game in its trailers. Looking back at some of Square Enix's previous releases, and to be honest, looking at the industry as a whole, I think it is fair to say that there is somewhat of a trend these days of trailers showing off more than they really should. It's largely why a lot of people tend to go on media blackouts, where after having watched a reveal trailer, they'll end up consuming absolutely nothing about a game, hoping to go into it day one as fresh as possible. Pretty much the opposite of my entire ethos, where I like to consume anything and everything in regards to a title that I'm absolutely dying to play. But looping this back to Final Fantasy XVI, in a recent discussion video with the Newspick channel, Yoshi P actually goes on record to state that he's seen that people have stated that Final Fantasy XVI has shown too much information in their trailers, but has retorted and replied by saying that the trailers actually show very little. And in all honesty, I am inclined to agree. If you take a look back at all of the trailers, as if we haven't been doing that already in anticipation for launch, you'll notice that they reuse and recycle a lot of pieces of dialogue and a lot of pieces of footage between all of the different trailers. Sure, some trailers have specific new pieces of footage, but the majority of them tend to be things that we've kind of seen with the initial reveal trailer. And a lot of the footage that we've seen in these trailers all tend to be things that people have talked about in the final previews that dropped a couple of weeks back. I'd also like to add, obviously, with my position of privilege, having been able to play the opening 5 hours of Final Fantasy XVI, I can say that a lot of what we've seen in these trailers also happened within those initial 5 hours. Keeping in mind that this game is supposedly 40 to 50 hours to play through, with 11 hours of cutscenes, I think Yoshi P is on the ball here in that we quite honestly haven't necessarily seen all there is to see. I'd also like to drive home the point that a lot of the cutscenes and pieces of dialogue that we've seen in some of these trailers that people might deem spoilery just because they're guessing that they're endgame cutscenes are things that we don't have any context for whatsoever. And so we could be piecing together some form of a narrative which could ultimately end up being nothing like the final product. And to round this section off, we can finish it out in style with a quote from Yoshida-san himself. "It's a game, so just have fun." Moving on, in that very same interview, Yoshida-san takes us down memory lane as he discusses how the team learned from the failures of its predecessor, Final Fantasy XV, and what they took from that going forward with the development of 16. He mentions how the most glaring issues in the feedback that the team received was how abrupt the story of Final Fantasy XV was and how quickly it came to an end, as well as all of the issues with the DLC and their implementation, and overall the issues with that game in and of itself and its structure. Which I think personally is putting it lightly, but let's be honest, he's not going to go and put 15 on blast in front of an audience. 15 was one of those titles that I was thoroughly looking forward to. I mean, I'm sure most of us here remember being enamored with the trailer for Versus 13 and just waiting for Final Fantasy 15 as it eventually became to be a tangible thing we could finally get our hands on. I ended up picking up Final Fantasy 15 on launch day and not putting it down until I platinumed that game and did everything that I possibly could, even consuming the extracurricular content like the Kingsglaive movie and the miniseries that they put out there that detailed Prompto and Noctis's friendship. And slowly through consuming everything, I came to terms with the utter disappointment that the game was, specifically in its launch state. I know the Royal Edition has gone back and fixed a lot of things, along with all of the DLC episodes that they included or put out that, quite honestly, we're never going to see the end of because the final batch of them just got cancelled. But putting my feelings in that rant about FF15 aside, Yoshida-san goes on to clarify in no uncertain terms that with Final Fantasy XVI, they ensured that the story would be coherent and complete and concise all in one package as a way to make amends or learn from the sins of the past, with that being Final Fantasy XV. And this is something that I touched upon in my final preview for Final Fantasy XVI, how the difference between FF15 and 16 is night and day, an incredibly stark contrast in the way that they set their world up, introduce their characters, introduce the motivations, how they handle the idea of royalty going through an incredibly tumultuous time with their world being turned upside down in an instant, and how that sets them up for the rest of the game. With all that said and done, we come to the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, particularly whether or not you enjoyed Final Fantasy XV and if you'll also be picking up Final Fantasy XVI. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.